to give thanks to the inspiration and wisdom of Max Mateo this morning. Do you know what you were doing about 14 years ago? 2008. Stock market was starting to kind of falter. The great financial crisis was starting to become upon us. Linda and Skylie and I drove to Ohio, paid $4 for gas, brought home 3 little bunny rabbits from Ohio, and they didn't like the Texas heat and ended up dying. But also during this time, on a splendid April afternoon in 2008, there were 2 college women's softball teams, one from Oregon and one from Washington, who squared off beneath the beautiful blue sky of the Cascade Mountains. Inside of this chain-link field, there were about 100 fans there to watch these teams play. And it was a decisive game because whoever won would go on to the division playoffs, and whoever lost got to oil their glove for one last time and then hang it up for the next year. The Western Oregon Wolves were a sturdy team that boasted several strong batters. However, Sarah Tucholsky was not one of them. She hit 153. For those of y'all who are not in tune with the baseball statistics of 153, every time she got, 7 times she would get up to bat and hit once. That's not good. As she went on to say, she was pretty much of a line drive kind of gal, but she was also a strikeout kind of gal. But that day she played in the game because a first-string fielder muffed the ball early in the game, and so she was put in. And so now it was her day at bat. In her 4 years of college baseball, she'd never hit a home run. But that Saturday, in the second inning with 2 runners on base, she connected with a curveball and sent it well over the 215-foot fence for a home run. In her excitement, she was running as hard as she could, and she stepped over first base. Several steps towards second, her coach yelled out and said, "Sarah, you have to go back and touch first." And so she planted her baseball cleated foot into the ground to pivot, and the only thing that twisted was her knee. She fell to the ground, anguishing in pain, crawled back to the base and hugged it, looked up to the umpire and said, "What do I do?" The umpire wasn't sure. He knew if any of Sarah's teammates assisted her, that she would be deemed out. If they replaced her, it would only be a single, not a home run. She wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't, for the life of her, figure out how she could help her team, but her leg wouldn't support her to go around the rest of the bases. How would she get to home plate? So the umpires huddled up to talk. Well, while the umpires are talking, I want us to consider a few things about our own life. Whether or not you believe it, we are a lot like Sarah Tucholsky. Though we may have worn-out knees, but not the internally deranged knee that she had, we too have stumbled, we have tripped, and we have fallen on the baseball field of life. We have stumbled morally. We have stumbled in our honesty. We have stumbled in our integrity. We have stumbled in trust areas of our life. And we, like Sarah, we are weakened. Perhaps physically, but also we are weakened because of the broken spirits and wounded hearts and the fading dreams of who we thought we were as we wrestle with the reality of our life today. So what do we do? What do we do? To whom will we turn? We turn to someone who understands. You heard earlier in the reading from Hebrews, for our high priest, Jesus, is able to understand our weakness. He was tempted in every way that we are, but did not sin. Let us then feel sure that we can come before God's throne, where there is grace. There we can receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. priest, a Savior who truly understands us. He really does. And since Jesus understands us and we are aware of the promise to never be forgotten or forsaken, we can be assured that He is ready and more than willing to meet our every need if we let Him. If we let Him. So how does God know our every need? How does Jesus understand us? Well, one of our pillars of faith is called incarnation. I'm not going to get real theological on you because, see, where Sherry and Danny are sitting, Jack used to sit there and he'd shake his finger if I started. No, he never did that. But he said, don't get too theological, don't get too uppity on us when you go to school. So I'm not going to do that. So incarnation, what does that mean? Incarnation. It means that God, for a short period of time, became like us. Isn't that humbling? John 1 tells us the Word became flesh and lived among us. Jesus was miraculously conceived, born of a virgin. Now, if he had if he had descended to earth as a mighty warrior who so many people thought that the Messiah should do, yes, we would be respectful of him, but we'd be real reluctant to kind of walk up and touch him. Had Jesus been conceived the old-fashioned way, between a man and a woman, well, we would certainly respect him, but would we be inclined to worship him? Probably not. But with Jesus as both God and human, we get the best of both worlds for our life. Isn't that great? It's like getting your cake and getting to eat it too. Jesus, fully human, fully divine. There was not one drop of his divine nature lost when he became human. Anybody remember the old Ivory soap commercials? How pure was Ivory soap? 99 and 44/100 pure. That's exactly right. Jesus was 100% purely divine. As Paul wrote to the church in Colossia, it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him. The hands that help place the universe where it is would end up to smooth wood on things that he would build. Those hands would heal the sick. They would reassure the brother with a gentle touch. And though Jesus looked human, every so often he would let a little divine slip out, so to speak, for people to experience. For Matthew records that the crowd spoke this, saying, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him?" So despite the fact that Christ had the authority and the power over everything and everyone since the beginning, he was willing to forego the privilege of the divine and become human. He became just like us. Luke records that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor of God and men. His body developed. He may have been a gangly or homely with squeaky voice kind of adolescent. He knew the pain of aching muscles. He knew the weariness after a hard day. If you remember, he was sleepy enough to doze in a boat that was being shaken so violently by the waves that it scared the disciples, literally almost half to death. He experienced pain like we cannot imagine when he was nailed to the cross and his lungs begged for air as he hung limply on the cross between two thieves. Hebrews 4:15 states, Jesus is able to understand our weakness, for he hears each and every one of our prayers, and he understands our need and our pain. So let me ask you, are you troubled in spirit this morning? John records that Jesus was troubled in spirit at the time. Are you so anxious that you feel that you could die? Matthew records a time when Jesus struggled with that. Overwhelmed with grief? John records that Jesus had moments like that. Have you ever prayed with loud cries and tears? Jesus did that too. Jesus understands. He gets us. He was so human, he could touch the people of his time so mighty that he could heal them as well. And for 30 years, Jesus pretty well blended in with the crowd. Pretty well unnoticed. And then and now, he is still so mighty that he continues to change history and not be forgotten 2,000 years later, and continues to change lives this very day. Now, there are some skeptics who would say, well, how do you know Jesus didn't sin since he was human? Since he was divine and he didn't sin, how can he fully understand us? You ever thought that? Ever heard that? It's an idea going around some churches today. Yet Jesus felt sin as much as if not more than we, because we give in to sin and he never did. We have surrendered to sin and he did not. Christ himself stood before the largest wave of temptation that Satan could muster, and Jesus stood firm. And because of that, he and only he understands sin and temptation more than anyone else who has or will live on this earth. As Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God, not on our own, but through God's Son. Christ never sinned, yet he was treated as the worst sinner at the time of the Roman world. He bore all of the guilt and all of the remorse and all the embarrassment that we experience when we sin. Jesus understands us. And as believers, we understand and we are grateful beyond words for the promise of forgiveness that Jesus offers to each of us. And to those who have experienced guilt and they don't know what to do, it matters. It matters because they need to know from us that, as the Hebrew writer wrote, we approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. That's part of the message of Christ that we share. So because Jesus was human, he understands. And because Jesus is divine, he can help us. Jesus does for us what Mallory Holman did for Sarah Tukolsky. Sarah, remember, she's the girl with the torn ACL on the ground, clutching first base. We left her when she was on the ground because the umpires were huddling it up, and they were talking because they never had a situation like that. So as the umpires huddled, then the players they kind of stood and watched, and the fans for a little while were okay, but then they started getting restless, saying that Sarah should be taken off the field, but she didn't want to leave because she knew that her home run would then be a single, and they would only have 2 runs and not 3. She wanted to get to home plate, and within Mallory Holtum's heart, God planted a seed of grace. She was the first base player on the opposing team of Central Washington University. She was a senior and wanted victory so bad, and a loss would end the season in which she and her teammates were playing. Now, the cynic in some people they'd say, I bet she's just really happy. That girl's laying there on first base just all wheeling and riding around and can't get around the bases, and so they're going to call it a single, and that gives us a chance to win, because this was only the second inning. But she wasn't one of those kind of people, exhibiting schadenfreude of someone else's pain. In this God-inspired moment, she walked up to the umpires and said, "Can I help her around the bases?" The umpires were shocked, one of them saying, "Why would you want to do that?" And before she could answer, another umpire said, "Just do it." So Mallory did, and she signaled for the shortstop that was playing in the game with her to come and help her. And the two of them walked toward this injured player. And they told her, "We're going to pick you up so that you can put your foot on every base and get home." And by this time, there were streaks in Sarah Tucholsky's eyes, and she said, "Thank you." So Mallory and her friend, you can see, there is a YouTube of this. There's a YouTube of this that you can see. Mallory and her friend got on each side, put their arm around her shoulders, lifted up one leg, and they went from first to second, and she put her foot down. They went from second to third, and she put her foot down. She went from third to home, and they put her down. And her teammates just cried and cheered, and those two young women who helped her get there backed away as the humble servants that they were, not looking for any thanks or glory. Sarah was smiling like nobody had ever seen her smile, because she had just hit the home run of her life. And she had. Trouble was, she needed help and get around the bases to get to home plate. And we are just like she was in that situation. We can come to places in our lives, starting out what we think is going to be the best place to be, and we will trip and we will fall. And whatever base that we rounded, we fall to the ground and we are in need. But God will make a way to get us home. God will make a way to get us home. Just as the player, Miss Mallory, responded to God's call to help get Sarah home, we too can point the way and offer those in our midst to the only person who has the strength to carry any and all of us away from any and all heartbreaking moment that we experience, to get us to where we need and to get us where we deserve. That is why we point the way to Jesus. Just like Sarah Tucholsky, she couldn't make it to where she needed on her own. We can't either. We're not good enough. We can't love enough. We're not understanding enough. We're not self-righteous to do what we have to do to get ourselves where we can experience the peace and the forgiveness and the understanding that only Christ can offer us, because He understands. He gets us. It is only Jesus that has the strength and the perfect plan for our lives to bring us peace and love to any life situation that we may encounter or experience. We just have to be humble and thankful and let Him carry us to the place that we need. After all, as the writer of Hebrews proclaims, Jesus is our high priest, able and willing to help us in our time of need. We just need to let Him carry us. It's that simple. Let us pray.